Hello and welcome to the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library's Sight and Sound video series. I'm Tom Walton. I first met our guest today a long time ago when both of us were quite a bit younger. I was a young Blade reporter and he was a young Toledo City councilman. But Bob's life ever since has been pretty much defined by a strong sense of family and by public service as an elected public official, as a successful businessman, and certainly as a civic leader who's never been able to say no to his community when he's been needed. And Bob Savage, thank you very much for sitting down with us today. I'm looking forward to this.
I am too, Tom. We've had a great relationship for a long time.
Absolutely. And you've been about family as long as I've known you, and I want to talk at the beginning about family. You were born on Christmas Day.
I was.
In 1937. And tragically, your mother, within 3 days, passed away from complications of childbirth. Your father, John, became the central figure in all 9 of your lives, you and your 8 siblings. He pretty much held the family together in that difficult time, didn't he?
Absolutely, no question. He was both parent and did a phenomenal job.
Now, you had no mother at home, but you had, again, 8 older siblings,
right.
And you had your dad's market
right.
on Detroit Avenue, Savage's Market. From my conversations with you about that time, that was pretty much your home away from home, wasn't it? Can you talk about the market and your experiences there?
Oh, sure, because the only experiences I had till I was 13 were basically grocery store experiences and going to grade school. But my dad had a grocery store, very typical in of the era. There were a zillion little grocery stores. And my dad had one. He had grown up in Plattsburgh, New York. Both he and my mother were school teachers. My mother had a college degree, which is fairly unusual for that vintage. And they came out here because you couldn't make a living. And they were about 50 miles from Montreal, I mean, way upstate New York in Plattsburgh. And it was suggested, my dad was principal of a little high school, I'll say Forks High School, and the man that was chairman of the board took a liking to him and said, "John, you're too sharp to get stuck up here." And he gave him, I don't know what it was, but Dad said a wad of money, and he gave him a blank check, and he said, "Spend the money to go someplace and get yourself some good roots in a place where you can prosper. And if you ever need to write anything big, write the check, and it'll clear the bank." And the guy happened to own the sawmill up in that part of New York. And Dad ended out here through Owen Murtaugh, who had grown up on a farm 3 farms away from him. And they established a grocery store, and it was called MB&S at the beginning, Murtaugh, Burns, and Savage. Burns was a local guy who obviously had some capital because neither of them had any money at all. And they ended up with 2 stores. Owen ran one out on Monroe Street where the Kroger store is now, near Secor. And ours was at Lawrence Wall in Detroit. Originally it was on Auburn Avenue, but it moved to before I was born, to Lawrence Wall in Detroit. And it was open 12 hours a day, like all those stores, or most of them, and 4 hours on Saturday. So with 9 kids, and we were the labor, and the oldest was 15, Marie, certainly Marie Witherell, my oldest sister, ended up with the brunt of raising the children besides my dad. And but my dad raised us in the grocery store. And a lot of people thought he was a grocer. I look back on it and think, gee, he really was, this was his laboratory to raise these 9 kids. And he was very stern, very pleasant. He was kind of an advisor to people. In those kind of neighborhoods, the only people that had a college degree would be there's one doctor, and there's one dentist, there's one druggist, and my dad. And I can't honestly think of anybody else who had gone to college. And so people came to my dad as an advisor. And he knew everybody that traded there. I mean, many people didn't have cars at all in the family. If they did, they certainly only had one, maybe every third house or something. And so everybody kind of hung out in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's how we grew up. And our house was on Detroit Avenue, about 2 blocks away, down toward Swain Field. And the church we went to, the school we went to, St. Anne's Church and St. Anne's School, was another block past Swain Field. It was at Bancroft and Detroit. But my whole world for 13 years went between the grocery store and St. Anne's, with the house to sleep at night and the
Was your dad's grocery one of those grocery stores I remember from my youth where credit was readily extended because people did not have a lot of money, and they'd pay for their food when they could, but not necessarily when they bought it.
That's correct. And we didn't do a lot of credit business, but we did some. Mm-hmm. And there's no question that you preferred cash. And my dad actually put in carts that people could shop for themselves, which was self-serve, which was relatively new at the time that they did that. And but there's no question that if somebody needed credit, you got a book out, put their name on it, and everybody had their own little book.
Yeah. Now, all 9 of you, you and your 8 siblings, worked at the market growing up, right?
Right. You can appreciate there's no mother at home. The other people are at school or they're at the grocery store, so the only place you went. I mean, even in the first grade, I would stop, and I had to go to Glenwood School the first grade, which I find really humorous looking back because I wasn't old enough to go to St. Anne's, whatever that meant. And my dad obviously had to do something with me, so he probably knew somebody at Glenwood or at the Board of Education, and he got me in the first grade. So I went 1 year to Glenwood, and then I transferred to St. Anne's for my second grade. Mm-hmm. But I came to the store right after school and stayed there till somebody took you home and fed you, and you went to bed.
What was your job, your first job at the grocery store?
Well, when you're that age, you stock shelves. Anybody can pick up cans and put them up on the shelf. So that's what you did, and then you peck potatoes. And in those days, it's tough to relate today when people buy 2 potatoes at a time. But in those neighborhoods, potatoes were very reasonable. I mean, 49 cents for a peck, 15 pounds of potatoes. And on Friday, you got ready for the onslaught of Friday night and Saturday, and we would have 50 pecks of potatoes pre-packed for people to pick up, and you just lean up against the counters. I mean, in the produce area. So.
Now, you must have done your job pretty well. You kept getting promoted, right?
Yeah, right.
Eventually, you began delivering groceries. Yeah. Is that right?
Well, you just took them out to their cars. You know, you were the carry-out boy, and then when you got into high school, you were in the produce department, and by my senior year, I became a butcher, and I butchered my 4 years at the University of Toledo.
Still have all your fingers, by the way?
I'm the slowest butcher in town, probably, Tom, the truth be known.
Again, I say you did your job pretty well because at one point, one customer was so impressed with your service that you provided him, he willed a car to you, a 1928 Willys Knight. Can you talk about that?
You've done your homework, Tom. Yes, Mr. Stump. I have no idea what his first name was. He was an attorney. He lived on Maplewood, which would have been just a couple blocks from our store. And he had an old Willys Knight, and he was in his 90s when he died. And his widow came in the next week and said, Mr. Stump left you his old Willys Knight in his will. Now, I don't know if it was really in the will or she wanted to get rid of the car. I mean, I have no idea what the circumstances were, but I still have it. A man named Ralph Emery, who was at the time probably 19 or 20, I bumped into after I was married. So, and I didn't get married till I was 29, so quite a few years later. It had been up really on blocks, and he knew how to work on cars. His dad had taught mechanical things at Maycomber, and I'm sure he picked up a lot of that. And he took the car for about a year and took everything apart, every piece of the engine, every piece of every wheel, the drive shaft, all that. And it runs today. In fact, he was over at the house last week. He still takes care of the car for me. I'm not very mechanical.
He gave it to you, Mr. Stump gave it to you. You were still, what, 3 years away from being able to legally drive it?
Yes, and you didn't illegally drive.
Now, what do you do with it today? You keep it in storage, or do you show it?
Well, actually, I keep it. We have a 3-car garage. We have the Willys Knight in one, all kinds of other things in the middle, and my wife's car in the third, and my car parks outside. I mean,
it's ironic because getting back to your neighborhood, few people had cars. Is that right? When you were growing up?
Yes.
And here you are, 13-year-old, and you've got one.
Yeah, but it was not very useful seeing that it went up on blocks right away.
Now, your father, John, never remarried. He apparently made his focus preparing his 9 children for adulthood and getting them educated. Is that pretty accurate, would you say?
No question. My dad was a mentor and a coach before you heard of those kind of terms relating to bringing kids along. And he clearly saw that as his only job. I don't think he saw himself as a grocer at all. He saw this was a way that he could be with his kids so he could move them along. And it worked. I mean, everybody, it's wonderful to look back on our family. And now at my age, obviously we have some medical complexities, as you might guess, and a couple have left us. But the reality is everybody was a leader. I mean, some of them were school teachers, but in that context, that sibling of mine would have been one of the leaders in their group. It just, my dad taught that. That was his skill.
As you grew into your young childhood, realized you had no mother, lost her shortly after childbirth. How did that impact you? What did that mean to you growing up without a mom?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Tom. I don't think there was any void in my case. I think there might have been more void in the ones that were old enough to have known her, so they knew what they missed. But when I came along, I just knew my dad as the family guru, leader, whatever you want to call him. And I don't think that I suffered at all. I think I had a great childhood. It's tough to believe that you would be working all these hours in the store all the time, and that's what you did. You didn't really do a lot of other things. I mean, you played a little ball, but nothing serious, because that was our lot in life. And I accepted that, made the best of it. And the kids had a really good time in the grocery store because there were enough of us, and we would play pranks, and and you really, I became a butcher just because I was that age, and we closed the store 2 weeks before I graduated from the University of Toledo. So and my dad just felt his job was done. Yeah. And then I lived with him, and my sister Margaret, who is deceased, was a school teacher, lived with him. In fact, we moved him from Detroit Avenue somewhere around 1966, 64. And with that, Margaret and Dad and I lived together until I lived there till I got married.
I thought it was interesting that apparently your father never owned the house you grew up in. He rented it. Was
That's
this
correct.
a consequence of not having enough funds enough money to go out and buy a house?
Well, certainly originally it was, but it was owned by Grandpa Garrity, who was, Mrs. Murtaugh was a Garrity. And I don't think he ever raised the rent probably after Mom died. And after that, it was just our place, and it was convenient. But at the beginning, I'm sure it was a way of getting into a house. But certainly he could have afforded a house later in life.
You talked about how the neighborhood was so compact and hardly anybody ever left it. But didn't you go down to Swain Field and see ball games occasionally? Was that close enough to imagine to walk?
Oh, yeah, Swain Field was part of the neighborhood. I mean, there's a very short distance. I don't know. Looking back, you probably could walk from our house to Swain Field in 7 minutes or something like that. And
of course, putting 12 hours a day in at the grocery store didn't leave a lot of time for baseball.
Well, but the store closed at 9 o'clock. The games started at 8:15. We could leave the grocery store and be down there by the end of the second inning usually, unless things were moving along. And we were fortunate enough, the man who brought Bond bread to the store, that was a big, like, Wonder Bread in those days, he worked at the ballpark as a part-time deal and manned the turnstile, so he'd let us slide in underneath the turnstile. We went to every game, and that was part of our life.
So you snuck into Swain Field?
We did, yes. It was probably not the correct thing to do, but we did it anyway, you know.
Finally, you did leave the neighborhood to begin your freshman year at Central Catholic High School. You have described that experience as a revelation. Can you explain why?
Yes, it's really interesting if you live in an industrial neighborhood. And I don't think most people that don't live in one have any idea how you feel. I mean, people didn't leave the neighborhood for much of any reason. And if you rode your bike a half mile outside the neighborhood, you'd talk about it for 3 weeks type thing as a kid. But when I got over to Central was the only Catholic school in town for males in that era. And actually, St. Francis started a class my junior year. They had freshmen and sophomores, I think. Excuse me. But going from a place like Detroit Avenue, from St. Anne's to Central, you got mixed in with the kids from all the big West Toledo parishes and the East Toledo parishes. And as somebody who grew up in an industrial neighborhood, you really think that the people that have good jobs in big buildings downtown and live in big houses probably know a lot more than you do. And the revelation was, they didn't know a lot more than some of us. and that was probably because of my dad's schooling background. So it was phenomenal. I mean, I enjoyed Central immensely because it opened my eyes to the potential I had in the world.
Were you an athlete at Central?
I was not. No, I was not. I played CYO ball, basketball, always not big enough to play.
Other than
football.
academics, what were your interests at Central?
The grocery store. I mean, you have no idea how dominant the grocery store was in our lifetime, because you felt that you had to do that for Dad because we were free labor. And then he fed us and, paid tuition and did all the things necessary. So.
You graduated from Central, what, in 1955?
Yes.
55, and then you enrolled at the University of Toledo.
Correct.
Why did you choose what was then known as TU?
Well, some people would have even said Bancroft High, right, in those days.
I wouldn't say that.
I wouldn't either. And I know, being a Bowling Green guy, you wouldn't bring that up, and I appreciate your tact. But there was no decision. I mean, there was no money. So if you're going to go to college, the girls could go to Marymans College, which was a Catholic girls' school down on Collingwood across from Scott High School, college. And the boys could go to UT. And never thought about anything. Thought it was great just to go to college. And very few people in those neighborhoods went to college. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting looking back. And it was... People could play the violin, Tom, and work at the Willys plant or the Chevy plant, and had no academic background at all, very smart, and obviously had a lot of skill, but they never had an opportunity to show it. I think it's still true today with people. And so it's always interesting to me how the university was liberating in that it taught me, I got involved right at the beginning out there in student government and those kind of things. And I met some really sharp people that mentored me. I learned some things that were outstanding and some things hardly worth knowing, probably. But at the end of the day, the university opened my eyes to the potential of having a great life, of John and I being able to build a business, and of...
What did you major in?
I was a finance major. My brother was not, and he thought it would be the right thing for our kind of business.
This is your older brother, John.
Yes, who was my mentor, chief mentor, no question about that. He was my big brother and one of the most creative, sharpest, most honest people you could ever meet.
We'll talk about John in a bit. Were you a member of a fraternity, and did you get involved in things like drama at UT?
Well, the funny part is I was on the board of University Theater, only 3 board seats, because they needed somebody who could coordinate people that were theatrical who wasn't. And so they asked me to be on the board my sophomore and junior year. But it really wasn't because I might have been a spear carrier in a couple of plays or something, but that wasn't my thing. My thing was we could get everybody kind of coordinated in the same direction.
Yeah. And fraternity life, did you try... joining
I did,
Greek
and
organization?
I had a great time belonging to a fraternity. Wouldn't trade the memories for anything. Wouldn't talk about a lot of them either.
Having been a Greek organization member myself, I know where you're going, and we'll just pass right by. I've only known you, Bob, as a Democrat, but I believe you told me you once joined the Young Republicans.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that?
Well, I could, but I'll try to be tactful. I was president of the College Young Republicans back in the Eisenhower era, and I went to a meeting, became the coordinator of the State College Republicans, because nobody else wanted to be, and which caused me to go to meetings in Columbus where I would be kind of the representative of the college students, with a handful of very key Republicans, and Bricker was the senator who kind of dominated the political aspects of that. Bob Taft, the truly great senator from Ohio, one of the legends in history, he found the political part, he had disdain for it probably, if you
Were you really leaning Republican, or was it simply politically expedient to be involved with them?
I don't think I was leaning anything. I don't think you grow up, at least in our neighborhood, thinking about that. But somehow I joined the Republicans, and Eisenhower was popular, obviously, and ended up being president of the group. But with that, when I got down to Columbus, and we were in these closed-door meetings where there'd only be 7 or 8 people. And of course, I was just listening. It was all, people that were doing things. They really had disdain for the people that lived where I lived. And you could just tell that by all their comments. Nobody's watching, the door's closed, there's a lot of conversation. I'm the young kid, I know I'm smart enough not to say anything. And as I watched that, it became very clear to me that they didn't have much interest in people that needed a lot of help. And everybody I knew growing up needed a lot of help. Yeah. And so I quit. I went back and actually quit being a young Republican, quit being president of the group.
Now, you graduated from the University of Toledo with a degree in finance in
Yes.
1959?
Yes.
And that was the same year, as you mentioned earlier, that your father retired and closed the store. Was there any discussion among the siblings about keeping the business going, perhaps specifically by you?
No,
that was
I
it.
think all the siblings clearly understood that they had a lot more opportunity than you'd find at Detroit, Lawrence and Wall in a grocery business. And it's tough to believe what having a 12-hour, 6-day week is, but that's what you do. And you had to go down in the early years to the produce department, the produce people downtown, and get the produce before you opened up at 9 o'clock too. So it was life's too short. There are easier ways to make things and more effective ways.
Okay, so the decade of the 60s was upon you. You, in your young 20s, early 20s. Did you have any idea at that point what you wanted to do with your life?
No, I just wanted to build the business with John. John was an exciting human being to be around. I mean, and anybody that knew him, and a lot of people around, did you know he died rather early. But
We're talking about John Savage and Associates,
I'm
the company he
I'm
founded.
talking about our insurance operation, which was John F. Savage and Associates when we opened the door a month before I graduated from the university.
John was the boss and you were the
I was the
associate.
associate, yeah. Yeah, no question.
Now, one thing you did was march yourself down to the U.S. Army recruiting office somewhere in that time span and sign up for the Army Reserves. Is that right? You spent 6 years as a reservist?
I did join the reserves. I don't want you to think I'm a hero, and I can tell you even today when they ask veterans to stand up, I do not stand up even though I was in service, because I think the people that really were in combat are the real veterans, and the rest of us just kind of went through what we had to do to keep our job. And at that point, we were seriously trying to build our business, and it was either join the reserves or go in for a longer period of time, and it was more convenient to
Now, one of the things you were doing in the same time frame, you're doing a lot of volunteer work for the Catholic Diocese of Toledo. Is that right? In the early 1960s?
Yes. Monsignor Jerome Schmidt, who was really one of the great leaders in this community by any standard, was very close to my brother John. And just a couple weeks after we started our insurance business, he came out to the office. He knew I'd been a campus leader at the university, and he asked me to get involved. And I got very involved and ended up, it was called TCCYA, Toledo Council of Catholic Young Adults. And Toledo was really one of the prime spots in America because of Monsignor Schmidt in development. And we had dances every Sunday night. In those days, 3-2 beer if you're 18, so everybody out of high school, out of college, not married, who could appear. We would get 300 or 400 kids every Sunday night with a live band and with 3-2 beer. And
There will be people watching this who haven't a clue what 3-2 beer was or is.
They claimed it was a lighter beer, and you could drink it at 18. You couldn't drink the stronger beer until you were 21.
Now, you met regularly with Monsignor Schmidt for your volunteer assignments, and where did those assignments take you?
Well, the Toledo Diocese really goes up to Sandusky and over to Lima and then over the Indiana border, so it's really about a fifth of the state. Any Catholic parish in that group would be involved if they wanted to be with the Toledo Council of Catholic Young Adults. We had basketball leagues, we put on theater presentations and things like that, and I became the president of the local group and the state group. And but it was a lot of fun. I mean, you got a chance to meet lots of young people your age. Obviously, many of those were even female, which was not a bad thing to do when you're right out of college. And so that was...
But you did all that at your own expense, right? I mean, there was no reimbursement. You were a volunteer. You didn't get gas money or anything like that.
Well, yeah, if you're a Catholic, you do understand that comes as part of the deal. Anytime they ask you to do anything, they expect you to just do it. I mean, I never heard of anybody getting reimbursed for anything, which is fair. But in those days, it was fun to do, and he would send me down to Mansfield to talk to somebody, or Lima, talk to the assistant pastor about what we could do to build a unit down there and that kind of thing.
Now, you were talking to me a while back about one of those breakfast meetings. Ned Skilden and Lud Ashley sit down with you and Monsignor Schmidt. Can you talk about that encounter and what came out of that?
Well, yeah, you have to appreciate, if you live in Detroit and Delaware, if somebody has their name on a pickup truck, they have a big business. I mean, it's very tough to look at the world that some of us have lived in and relate back to that. And people who grew up in Old Orchard or wherever wouldn't have any idea that that would be the case, but that was just the way society worked. And I would meet with Monsignor Schmidt probably every 6 weeks, and he loved to go to the Hillcrest right after he said 7 o'clock Mass. He could say Mass rather quickly and get there in a very punctual manner by 7:30 or 7:35. And he and I would sit down, and he'd kind of tell me, because he knew his whole world was the church, so he knew everything that was going on and throughout the diocese. And so he would give me assignments and say, go talk to this guy about that. You know, maybe we got some potential here, that kind of thing. And one day I went in to meet with him breakfast. He showed up, and he was there by 7:30 that day. I remember, because I used to always kid him about whether he could actually get there from St. Patrick's downtown at 7:30. And about 10 minutes after we sat down, Lud Ashley sat down, the congressman, the Marcy captor, if you would, of that era, and Ned Skeldon, who ran the county commissioners, neither of whom I had ever actually seen in person before. These are the kind of people that were in the paper. And I was kind of astounded, but it became clear to me that they were friends of Monsignors. And I had no idea what was going on. And about 10 minutes further into the breakfast, Monsignor Schmidt said, he said, this young kid has more leadership skills than many of the people you have on city council. You should, and Monsignor was a very declarative kind of guy. He said, you should put him on city council. And he was talking to Congressman Ashley. And Ned Skeldon, who nobody was talking to, said, I'll do it. And he took his fist and he hit the table, as Skell could do. And I got to know Skeldon, a great leader, really well after that. And so with that, I ended up going down and being interviewed, and nobody asked me any questions. And I was an endorsed Democrat to run for city council. And it doesn't seem today, where young people do a lot of things, where that would be a big deal. But at 25, to be elected to city council or to be nominated was unheard of.
Were you a little disappointed that the screening committee had no questions for you?
No.
You weren't disappointed? It was clear somebody had said something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I went down there having no idea, and I went early and watched some other people being interviewed, and everybody got a lot of questions from these, I thought, really old people, certainly most of them much younger than I am today, sitting around this table that was on 3 sides, and probably 15 people on the committee or something. They all looked like they were 100 to me at the time. Of course, that's all part of how young people view things. And no, I had no idea what the process would be. And when they didn't ask me any questions, that's kind of interesting, and I left. Didn't think much more about it. And 2 days later, my name was in the Toledo Times, the morning paper owned by the Blacks, that I was an endorsed Democrat, which I didn't hear about it until I saw it in the Toledo Times.
Then it must be true if it's in the newspapers.
That's correct.
So in 1963, and you're just 25 years old, you decided to run for Toledo City Council. Any misgivings about that? Were you a little nervous about it? Did you feel perhaps I'm not ready, or was it time to charge ahead?
Well, I had taken an enormous number of economics and political science courses at the university. All my electives were in one of those two. And that doesn't make me very well balanced, but that's obviously where my interest was. And so I thought it was kind of just a continual experiment of things we did out at the university. I got on the phone and called lots of people, some of whom are still around today and around town today, and that were leaders at the university, and said, hey, I'm going to run for council. Could you give me a hand? And everybody was this is exciting. Somebody's running, doing something. And because most of the people I went to school with didn't grow up in real affluent areas. They grew up in middle class areas, if you will. And we put together actually a huge group of people from the university, and then a lot of the Catholic young adults helped. And we had certainly 10 times as much manpower as anybody else running.
But not nearly as much money, I suspect.
Had no money. Had no money. In fact, we did everything on the cheap, and but we didn't spend money. We didn't have any advertising. We had made signs that were huge, and we made a lot of them and put them on every corner and just pounded on doors and asked people if we could put one up. And they were big. They were this big, and they were like this. And it was an 8-foot piece of plywood cut in 4 pieces. And then we had an artist depict me as an older person because, you didn't want to put age 25 on it. In those days, lots of people wouldn't have voted for you, I'm sure. And I was fortunate enough to be elected.
Was there a primary first? Did you have to clear that hurdle?
Yes, then I don't know exactly. 18 people in those days, city council was 9 people, all at large. There were no districts. And so the first 9 vote getters win and everybody else goes back home. And I made the top 18 in the primary, but I did very well in the primary. I was 10th or 11th. And with 9 to be elected, it gave me a lot of publicity, both on TV and on at the Blade, with this young person, and it became the story. And so I think at that point it probably moved it to be an advantage to be different from the others.
Talk a little bit about general election night. What were you feeling? Waiting, it's finally time for the votes to be counted. You're going to find out whether all this work paid off or whether you're going to fall short. You must have been kind of tenuous, nervous about what might be coming.
No, I was very nervous about it, and I had no idea what would happen, of course. I mean, when you don't have much of a perspective at that point. And I can tell you, I wasn't married. I didn't get married till 4 years later. And so I actually isolated myself and listened to the returns on WSPD AM.
By yourself?
Yeah, I was by myself, and I knew where the family was, but I said, I think I'd just soon listen to this alone. But as things started looking decent, I ended up, I think I ran 7th out of the 9 that made it. So.
Pretty impressive showing for a 25-year-old.
Well, a lot of people from the university and the Catholic Young Adult Group really did it. And we virtually had an army. And it upset the other candidates because they obviously didn't have that. And I felt badly about that, but not badly enough not to want the army.
Exactly. Well, that was 1963, right, when
That's
you
correct.
first won.
Yes.
But that was a monumental year for you in another way. You met President Kennedy, and you met the woman who would become the love of your life, your soulmate, your wife, all in the same weekend. I got to hear that story.
Well, it's very interesting to me because of the respect Monsignor Schmidt held in the Catholic Church nationally and in the young adult area. I ended up being on the national board, one of 7 national officers, and I was state president also of Ohio. But it really had to do with the respect for the community here that Schmidt had developed in young adults. And there was a big national convention. It was at Madison Square Garden, the big place in New York. Every town that was a decent size, especially if they were this side of the Mississippi, would have 4, 5, 6 Greyhound buses full of young adults going. And I went a couple days early because being on the national board. And our speaker was President Kennedy.
And what time of the year was this in '63?
It was in the fall. It was
in the
November.
fall.
It was mid-November or late November.
Just less than 2 weeks away from the assassination.
Yeah, it was. In fact, I think it was. I think it was less than that actually. Wow. I shook his hand as one of the national officers on the stage as he came up to the podium, and it was obviously, you can imagine, meeting the president.
Yeah. Not wanting to jump ahead too much, but what were you feeling when he died?
Crushed.
I can imagine at your young age, and here's a political hero. yeah. But on a much happier note, that same weekend, you met Sue.
I did.
Tell us about that.
Well, a friend of mine wanted to be a national president. I knew him very well, of the Catholic Young Adult Group. And I decided, being on the national board, I knew a lot of the people. I'd go around and help him meet delegations. And in the process, I went to Columbus, Ohio, and I knew the president very well because I was state president. And when I got done introducing my friend who wanted to be the national president, I'm looking at the audience of delegates they have. We're in a hotel room, and there's, I don't know, it's a lounge type area. There's probably 80 people in the room from Columbus or something like that. And I spotted this really good-looking girl. And so I asked the president afterwards, when my friend got done speaking, I said, "Hey, Bill, who's the good-looking girl in the third row?" And he said, "Savage, she's a child." I said, "I didn't ask you how old she was. I asked you who she was." And he laughed. He said, "I'll introduce you." And that's how I met Sue. She was just starting her sophomore year at Ohio State, and I was an old man. I was in the life insurance business, and I was a city councilman in
All
politics.
of this is occurring within a couple of months of your election to
right.
city council.
Right.
You had been looking, and I read this somewhere, that you have said you would have been looking for, quote, an ideal wife who could jump on the bandwagon. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, I don't know even where you got that quote because I don't remember it. But no, I was hunting for somebody that was very smart to make up for my own deficiency in that area, somebody who truly took school seriously, somebody that had a disposition. And one of the, and I said this a couple of weeks ago out at Lourdes, speaking to a leadership group at Lourdes University. Somebody asked what's an important decision. I said there's only one, and I believe that. It's not where you go to college. Nobody ever asks me anymore, or you, where you went to school. You might choose to bring it up. But who you choose to walk through life with is the only important decision you ever make in your life. And you ought to have criteria for it. And what I said to the young people out there is, if you get married on Saturday night after 3 or 4 beers, you're an idiot. You talk about one thing you want to be objective about, does this person have the characteristics that you're hunting for in your children? Because whether you like it or not, half of the characteristics in all ways will reappear if you choose to have children. And so pick wisely. And it's not just the ones you like, it's the others too that reappear.
Well, I would say, Bob, you certainly chose wisely.
No, I married
knowing Sue as I do.
I married way over my head, and the audience should know that your wife is a savage too. Now, she's not related to us at all, but I've told him for years it's still the best thing that ever happened to him.
Absolutely. I would say all these years later, how many years have you been married as we sit here in 2013?
47 years.
I'd say the bandwagon's still rolling right along.
It is. She still tolerates me. So.
That's good. That's good. You were chosen, and again, we talk about changing times. Outstanding Young Man of the Year in Toledo, in 1964. Again, we're just backing up slightly. I don't know, they even still have that award?
I don't think they do.
But it was just Outstanding Young Man. But here you are, a young guy, and nominated at a young age for a pretty prestigious award, wasn't it?
Well, in those days, it really was very prestigious. It probably was an enormous help to me in many ways. There were 10 young men selected, and there was a lot of publicity, probably 2 months before they actually had the banquet. And they would be people that had succeeded in different kinds of businesses and in different areas of the world of work. Now, TV was in its infancy, and it wasn't test pattern days, but it was shortly after that. And WSPD TV, Channel 13 in those days, sponsored it, along with the Chamber of Commerce, and they selected 10 young men. Obviously, that wouldn't work today. And they had a huge banquet at the Commodore Perry, which was the main meeting hall in town, with a gorgeous a facility in their main gathering room, and they placed the 10 young men next to, this is tough to believe today, the 10 CEOs in town that were prominent. I mean, the CEOs of Owens, Illinois, Owens Corning, Dana. I mean, they were all there. And to think that today you could do that is humorous, but that was the time. And I happened to sit next to Harold Beschenstein, who was the CEO of Owens Corning. And at the end of the evening, I was selected the Young Man of the Year. But this was all directly telecast. It wasn't delayed, so that anybody was watching Channel 13 that night saw the whole banquet. Now, once again, you can't envision that today. I can't. But those were the times. But it was the story with John and I in the cover, and that award, which ironically my brother received the next year, all were very big moments in our lives, and a lot of fun for people that grew up in a factory neighborhood and didn't have much going for them when they started. So we've always been very thankful for some of the many things that the Blade did, and the community's done, showing their appreciation for our talents.
Bob, you won re-election in 1965, and you were the top vote getter
I was,
in
yes.
the 1965 election. That had to be quite an honor for you.
It was huge, and I like the kid Andy Douglas that somebody went ahead of him, and he has a great sense of humor about that, as you might guess. And but I was diligent about being a councilman too. I wasn't married either in my first time I ran or the second time I ran. I got married halfway through my second term. Mm-hmm. And I did have a lot of time, and I really pursued it because I wanted to understand the city. I think it's been a big help, by the way, to me as a human being and to many of the charitable organizations and civic things I've done, because I do understand how the whole thing works.
Vice mayor 2 years later in '67, right? Once again, you're the top council vote getter.
Right. In those days, when I was first elected, they elected the mayor and the vice mayor from the city council. We changed to a direct elected mayor in '65, no more powers, just directly elected. And then the vice mayor was still elected by council, and I was unanimously.
So you still needed to get the approval of your fellow council members.
Well, and I was nominated actually, and got.
Vice mayor, of course. Votes. What would we call that today? President of council.
Yeah, that's probably the closest synonym to it today.
Okay, and we talked about that third term. You were elected in 1967 to that third term, and you served it out. But you also announced that even though you were again the leading vote getter, you were not going to seek a fourth term on council. And for an up-and-coming political star, that would seem to me to be an abrupt change. What motivated you to do that?
Well, I saw the political world for what it is, and looked at, in those days I really was very close to Ned Skeldon, very close to Lud Ashley, any of the players statewide and those from Ohio that played nationally. And you say, what do you want your life to be about? And I looked at the potential our business had and looked at what I was doing. Is there any place I'd like to be? Would I like to be the congressman someday? And those things just, if you go to the House of Representatives, you get to wait about 9 or 10 years till anybody talks to you, as you well know, Tom. And so I looked at all that and said, and so I announced really 4 or 5 months into my third term that I would not be seeking election, and everybody was very surprised. And many of them told me, well, I'd come back, including Skeldon. He said, well, Savage, you'll be back in 6 months. You'll be bored. And well, I haven't been bored yet. And but I've had a very meaningful life. But I've had a life by selection, not one by default. I mean, I really have had very clear goals. I got married so we could have children, and I thought it would be fun raising children. I saw my dad do a great job of that. I think we've done a great job.
You didn't see a life in elected politics at that point.
I didn't find it appealing at all, Tom. It is too demanding, and without a future. And if you want to have a family, I would like my children, if there's, at the time we didn't know they would be sharp enough, but I always said that I'd like my children to be able to go to the same schools that the Stranahans can go to, or the Knights, and if they're capable of getting in. And by the way, as you know, they did. And it was because of Sue, not because of me.
But do you ever look back and reflect, you could have been run for mayor, you could have run for statewide office, and still stayed close to home?
No, Tom, I'll tell you, I think my life has been much more exciting than anybody else that I know. As I say, it's been a purposeful life. And I think I've been able to help the community more by all of the civic activities I've had. And I find that much more meaningful without the downside of having to go through elected process.
Well, you did leave elected office behind, but you didn't leave politics behind totally. You became involved in John Glenn's political career. How did that happen?
Well, it's really kind of a funny story. We had a Democratic senator in the state of Ohio at the time, Stephen Young.
Stephen Young.
And now I'm very young, and I'm somewhat of a wise guy, I'm sure. But I thought he was 107, and he was really old. I don't know how old he is. I'm sure he's probably about the age I am today, actually. And
you don't look 107.
No, I don't. But Steve Young didn't either, I'm sure. But I just did not see him as the kind of person that the great state of Ohio, which I've always taken pride in, should have representing them in the U.S. Senate. And there was a small article in the New York Times that I happened to read that said that the astronaut John Glenn was thinking about running for the Senate. And I was out of government by then, but just by a couple of years. Still, as you said, had a lot of interest. And so I picked up the phone from my office and I called NASA in Houston and asked for John Glenn, and he appeared on the phone. I mean, it's tough to believe that you could do that.
That is tough to believe.
I mean, it's tough to believe, but he just appeared on the phone. And I said, Mr. Glenn, you don't know me at all, but I saw the article in the Times, and I have no idea whether you're going to really do that, but if you decide to do it, here's my phone number. I probably understand the political process at this end of the state as well as anybody you can talk to, and I would be a strong advocate of your running. And he did call some months later and said, next Wednesday I'm making an announcement from the Neal House in Columbus. If you show up, I will be glad to talk with you. I took my brother Jim, who was a PR guy at the time, and we went down there. And Tom, you'll relate to this more than most of the audience, but when the news conference is over, those people go write the story. They don't stick around for many questions. And so we ended up with John Glenn, his wife Annie, Dr. Good, who was the PR director of NASA, and my brother Jim and I upstairs in a hotel room for 2.5 hours talking to the astronaut, just like you and I would talk. I was dumbfounded that you could do that, and developed a great relationship with him, and was delighted to be involved in his campaign. And the irony is, I went around to all the office holders when he was taking on Steve Young in the primary, and told him we should get ahead of this curve, and we should really show him Lucas County is going to be strongly for him. And I even talked to Ned Skeldon, who was then the chairman of the county commissioners, and Bud Ashley, who was our congressman at the time, very senior congressman, into coming out in the primary and not for the incumbent, which certainly would be unusual. And we had a nice picture taken of the county officials and all the rest of us in front of the courthouse. And 2 days after that, he fell in the bathtub. John Glenn fell in the bathtub, hit his head, had a tremendous inner ear problem, and had to pull out of the race. And I can assure you, Congressman Ashley and Ned Skeldon made it very clear how much they liked my ideas after that.
That's interesting, yeah.
But he did go on to develop a great friendship, and I coordinated his campaign a couple times when he was running for the Senate and the Senate of the state, and we're certainly proud that he was representing Ohio as the first American up in space.
Certainly a great American, that's for sure. Now, I think we need to talk a little bit about this transition from college to adulthood, to a new husband, a young father. And you joined a family business in 1970, not in groceries, but in insurance and financial planning. And you mentioned John F. Savage and Associates, established by your older brother, John. You both set out about growing this business. That was your first challenge, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Can you talk about how that unfolded?
Well, because John talked me into majoring in finance. John loved being in the life insurance business, and that's what we were in at the beginning. Today we're a very diverse financial planning, estate planning firm, but that's not what we were at the time. And John had this great vision that we could find people like ourselves who were college educated, had positive attitudes, enjoyed life, had a great sense of humor, and a lot of energy, and were willing to work. And you find a lot of people like those. Some of them have been coaches, and we just look for people like ourselves. And so in 1959, when we started, in actually April of 59, we started gathering, and we didn't gather very many. We would bring in 2 or 3 people a year, but we didn't lose very many in an industry that loses many. And pretty soon, we had a sizable group.
I think over the years, in fact, you built the business into one of the largest insurance-based financial services firms in the country, and that's still true today, isn't it?
It is. John became a speaker. My brother had a tremendous command of a microphone. He was a great storyteller. He absolutely could light up the crowd. Most speakers are either technically competent in our kind of business or they're funny, and John was both. He was very technically competent, but he was very humorous, had a zillion one-liners that he liked to energize the audience with, and he took a liking to that. And so in the early 70s, which is pretty new in our business, seeing we started in 59. He started working on me to want to become president. I really had no interest. I loved being that. By then I was the assistant general agent. I was the guy that talked to him unless it was serious. Then you sent him down to the big guy, and I liked that because it made any difference to me what John said. We always got along well, and I always respected what he did. But he talked me into becoming the CEO in 1975, and somewhere
he started backing away from the active CEO role that he passed along to you,
right? And
onto this new interest of his in public speaking, motivational speaking.
Yeah, and clientele building. John had some of the sharpest people in this community who were personal clients. And they were great friends. So his combination of being, the advisor to them and then doing the public speaking was the role he wanted. He did not like keeping track of all the little things you have to do as a business grows. I mean, there's a lot of little things to take care of.
How much older was John?
7 years.
7 years older than you. You and John were both named Entrepreneurs of the Year in Toledo in 1991. That had to be gratifying to share that with your older brother.
Well, it was, and once again, that was a relatively new program. It was sponsored by Ernst & Young and Inc. magazine and somebody else, it was a big deal locally. And when we were named the Entrepreneurs of the Year together, it's certainly one of those things that really put a spotlight on these young guys who were building this what became a financial services business.
Well, now, just 2 years later, in 1993, John passed away after a fight with leukemia. How did losing your big brother affect you?
Oh, tremendous, in all ways. We knew he was very sick. He had gone to University of Michigan. They diagnosed it as amyloidosis, and it ended up being light chain deposition. The guy at Michigan, the doctor at Michigan, said he wasn't sure what it was, but he said there's a guy at Mayo that will know, and John went up to Mayo with Kate and found out that he had light chain deposition, which is the vast overproduction, in a simplistic term, of the light chain protein. He lived quite a while after that. Went through a lot of experimental things, but eventually died tragically early. There's no question about that.
How old was he when he passed?
He was 62.
Yeah, much too early. But he had instilled in you a business philosophy that survives to this day. Could you summarize what that philosophy might be, Savage and Associates, with regard to character, with regard to ethics in your professional life? How would you summarize what your firm's all about in that regard?
Well, in 1975, when I became the boss, we put a sign up. I put a sign up, in fairness, in the education room. We bring in young college graduates. And we don't bring in many of them. But it said 4 things. It said, if you do these 4 things, you'll always be successful. If you do what's right and avoid what's wrong. If you treat other people, Tom, the way you want to be treated, and what that means is if I think of this really clever thing when you and I are having a little argument, that I know if I say it will knock you right over, I need to say to myself, if I was sitting in Tom's chair, would I want that delivered on me? And if not, shut up. So treating other people really the way you want to be treated.
You never win any arguments that way.
No, you don't. No, I'd be a terrible newsman. There's no question about that. But the third thing it said was always do the best you can. That's all we can expect of people. Mm-hmm. And the 4th thing says keep in touch with God. And we have people of every religion out at our organization, and I'm sure probably a couple non-believers, but it works for everybody. And I think that is what permeates. And somebody asked me some years ago at a big national management meeting of our industry, what's different about us, and I could take a long story out, but in effect, I said, we fire jerks. We know that people are relatively competent when we hire them, but if you don't have a caring attitude, somebody who really wants to be a team player, somebody that does, we don't need somebody who needs their ego salved every 26 minutes. We want to build a family of competent people giving great financial advice. That's what we're about. And I think that's what we're known for. I take great pride in our image.
Well, you and your family and your business are known for another important thing, and of course that is service to the community and giving back to the community. Why is community service so important to Bob Savage?
Well, I think it's the way we were raised. Always make something a little better when you're involved. I mean, if you're in an apartment store and there's something, a shirt knocked on the floor, you should pick it up as you go by. Don't wait for somebody who works and gets paid for it. I mean, that's just, and it's in a grocery store, you have a lot of those opportunities to learn those things, and it becomes innate in your personality. And so that's really, we should make Toledo better. That's our goal, our collective goal. And I think it's a phenomenal place to live if you're family oriented, because you're 20 minutes from any place. Mm-hmm. You can absolutely know what's going on in your kids' lives. It's a very efficient place to find very good schools at relatively reasonable prices compared to big cities. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a huge advantage. Now, it doesn't appeal to lots of people, and I understand that. But for me, I couldn't live in a better place in Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah. Well, it's a big city, but small enough to have a real impact with your community service and giving back. In fact, you made the point that you donate, I find this kind of amazing, that you donate 8 hours or try to donate 8 hours of your personal time back to the community every week outside your business obligations. Why that strong personal commitment?
Well, I just think that's not a lot of time if you think about it. It's not a big percentage of time. But I've always held that feeling, and I always say yes if I can. I don't say no, prove to me it's good. If somebody asks me to do something and I know it'll help them, I try to say yes. Now, I have to limit that because obviously I get...
That's what we talked about in the introduction. You don't know how to say no.
Yeah. But I do say no a lot, but I get a lot of requests.
We can talk about some of those activities. I've been a member, as have you, for forever, the Distinguished Clown Corps, which some folks might not know what that is. Can you talk about the Distinguished Clown Corps and your involvement in it?
Well, years ago, there was not a Christmas parade or a holiday parade. And Wally Hyatt it's tough to believe, Food Town was the biggest grocery store in the area. And the guy that ran it was Wally Hyatt, and he was bigger than life type person, and a great guy and a great personal friend of mine. And they were asking him to reestablish a Christmas parade. And so he called me and he said, Savage, you're going to be a clown. I said, yes, sir, probably, knowing how I treated Wally. And he started this Distinguished Clown Corps, and he found some place where they charge clowns, they charge businesses to sponsor clowns. So he was saying, your business is going to sponsor you, and we're going to take all these $500 bills at the time, and we're going to buy floats and all these other things to put the rest of the parade together. And Wally put it together all by himself, and went on and ran it until, for many, many years, I don't know exactly how many, but we're now in our 26th year. I have been a clown every year. I became the chairman 11 years ago, I believe. Jim Murray, past president of Toledo Edison and a great community guy, has been my strong right arm, if you will, in the process all the way through that. And today we have Joe Napoli from the Mud Hens and Keith Burwell from the Toledo Community Foundation. The three of them are all helping lead the deal with me, and I feel great. We now have we had 90. I just got the report from Tracy Sala 2 days ago. We now have 90. This past year, we had 93 paid clowns, which is clearly the most we've ever had in history, which gives us more money to have a better Christmas parade. And
I can tell you, having done it, a few things more gratifying than walking around in a clown suit in the Christmas parade with the children so excited, and you're passing out candy to all the kids, and it's just a great time and a wonderful idea. And of course, back to you're helping to establish it with Wally Hyatt. I want to talk too about COSI and the many attempts to keep COSI afloat and ultimately transition to something different. We know it today as Imagination Station, but again, Bob Savage, right in the heart of all of that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when there was a festival marketplace down there that really came out of Baltimore, and
people will remember it as Portside.
Portside, and they had stamped out those. It had been very successful in Baltimore, so they obviously stamped out many of them around the country, including Portside. Cleared a lot of things out, part of the urban renewal project, if you will, and put it on the best land in town, probably, from an economic standpoint. And it went out of business. And it went out of business because it didn't have enough foot traffic for the kind of stores and restaurants that were in there. And when that happened, Donna Owens was just ending up being mayor, and John McHugh was just becoming mayor. And they were told that the merchants were going to pull out, and they called myself and one other person and said, do you think the business community could get involved in trying to figure out what to do with this? And we ended up having public hearings and decided it should be something kids-oriented. Rick Deal, who had been sent in to be the banker that took over Toledo Trust with Society Bank as the head guy, had actually come from Columbus, Ohio, where he had done the same thing for his bank. And so he had known the COSI group in Columbus. And after we looked at a lot of other alternatives and really went through a long process trying to figure out what to do with it, everybody that wanted to come in from out of town, it was their brilliance and our money. Of course, we didn't have any money, so I mean that doesn't work. And so we ended up putting together COSI, and that worked very well at the beginning. It was not sustainable because it had no public help. We ended up going through the third election, and we finally, the people finally, and we lost the first two by. We had more than 49% of the vote in the first two, but we went for the third time. Jim Huffman was terrific from Key Bank, and Dave Waterman from Shaloop, and we were fortunate enough to get it passed, and now it prospers as the Imagination Station, and it's a great community asset. And we need to get more science and math oriented with our kids. There are a lot of bright people whose parents, if you've come up in a house where the family is oriented toward science and math, you will be probably pretty decent in those areas. But there are a lot of people who have the ability whose parents aren't mentors by nature, and so we become the surrogate mentor to bring those things out. And we're doing a pretty good job at it. Lori who runs the place, Gloria Hauser, is as good as you could find, in my opinion, at being the day-to-day boss.
So Bob, COSI's ultimate failure led to, finally, as you pointed out, the third try was the charm for a public support levy, and it came back as Imagination Station, and it has been thriving, hasn't it?
It has.
Now you've got public memberships and public tax support.
We do.
Two key components.
Right, and we also have a lot of business support.
Right, and that leads to my next question about the Science Society. Can you talk about that and what its role is?
Sure. What we have is the smallest tax levy in the history of Lucas County that gives us just enough money to have a staff. Now, we have less staff than we used to. We really focus on getting volunteerism. We think that's a key component of where we should be very good, and we keep working at that all the time. But as I looked at it a couple years after we were prospering as the Imagination Station, the one thing that was clear to me is we didn't have any dollars for capital improvements. And in a museum like that, or a center, you need to every once in a while put a new wow in. Some years you get lucky and some business will give you, $400,000 to do something, but those are tougher to come by these days than they were when I was a younger guy in the community. And so I started thinking about how do we solve this, because we can't just keep the things we have. Pretty soon you are old just by being some years down the road in how you look to people. And the museum has a wonderful group that Sue and I have been a member of for a long time called the Apollo Society. And you have people that give $5,000 or $6,000 a year to belong to it. It only meets twice a year. It's really a way of supporting the museum. And they get together and they vote on art, which I find, I don't vote. My wife votes. I don't know anything about it. I love it, but I don't have any clear understanding of it. But I said maybe we could do something like model it after the museum's Apollo Society, which Georgia Wells really founded. So I called Georgia and told her we were stealing her idea for another good cause, and we have had the Imagination Station, and we knew we couldn't probably charge as much as the museum, but we thought we could get a reasonable amount of money, and we pegged it. We put together a board, first of all, of 11 people who are really community leaders. And we argued how we could do it, and we settled on we'd charge $2,500, but then we'd give people an option of 3 levels that are higher. There's no advantage to giving more money except if you happen to feel more deeply about the cause and both have the discretionary money, then we could use the help. And ironically today, we have 96 members, which is unbelievable. In the last 3 years, we've been able to do that. And about a third of them give at one of the higher levels. And this is giving us money. We now have over $1 million in our account at the Toledo Community Foundation, totally segregated from the money at Imagination Station. And we just voted a couple of weeks ago to build a really interesting science lab where students will be able to come in and really sit there and develop things in groups. And we're now in the process of delineating what that is going to be. And fortunately, we're getting a lot of help from some of the technical people in town. We're taking our original idea and now we're looking at it through the eyes of, in fairness, some geeks and some people that know a lot more about math and science than I do, Tom. And it'll be interesting to see what we come up with. But we think we will build something that will give us a national reputation.
It's been great to see the Imagination Station succeed, and you get a lot of the credit for that. I want to talk too about your service to the University of Toledo. You talked about your undergraduate years there and what it meant to you, but you were a UT trustee, were you not, from 1985 to 1996 or so?
Yes.
That had to be very gratifying, come full circle as an undergraduate. Here you are sitting on the Board of Trustees. Can you talk about that service?
Well, first of all, I have a great love for the university. I go to all the ball games, have since my undergraduate days. But I have a lot of love for the academic end. And fortunately, when I was a trustee, I was put in charge of building and grounds. And Dr. Richard Bruner, who was one of my mentors when I was a student, great buddy as I graduated and moved out into the community work. He was in charge of the faculty of beautification, and so being in charge of building and grounds at the board level and being close to Dr. Bruner, and unfortunately he has passed away in the last few years, but we worked so well together and made sure that everything, one of the true beautiful things about the university is the physical appearance of it, the Lannon Stone and how the grounds are kept up. And every time they cut doing Lannon Stone in a building, it shows up like a sore thumb. And so he and I were both arm in arm in making sure that anything we did right. And I think that's a very important legacy for the university. Other people put it together earlier and caused it. We just made sure nobody goofed it up. And but I love being a trustee, and I think the presidents I served with would say that I'm a pretty decent, quiet mentor. I don't say much in meetings, but I'm always glad to say, as you know, anything one-on-one that I think will be helpful. And yet I don't, once I give you the thought, I don't care whether you do it or not. You're in charge, I'm not in charge, I'm just an advisor. And I think in that role as a board member, I got a lot out of it, and I think the university benefited from it.
You were involved in the Student Recreation Center project, and I think that was one of the things you were especially proud of.
Well, it is, and there's no question I caused it because I was on your alma mater's board, as you know, some years before that, and we'll go down that road, but I certainly was very close to Hollis Moore, who was the president then, who I think is one of the 2 or 3 sharpest presidents I've ever met at any university. And in that process, they had a student rec center developed, and I watched that. And so when I got on the board at the university, it was the thing I started saying is missing. You now have a lot more dorm students than when I was there, but you need a place where the dorm students and the commuters can interact, and nothing will do that more clearly than the rec center. And when I first brought it up, I was told there was no way you could do it. And I said, well, let me develop a plan. And I came back with a plan where the students would actually be involved in the selection. And they would then hopefully vote to tax themselves with a student fee. And now this was before corporate jets were around, but we borrowed from 3 of the companies in town their private jets. The president and myself and student leaders went in them to 4 different universities in the Midwest where they had new rec centers. We came back that night, and I remember telling the students as we're in a hangar, I think it was Olivia Owens Ford hangar, out at the airport, that this was like a Wednesday. I said, this Sunday night at 6:30, we're going to have a party at the president's house. There's going to be Coke and pizza, and invite all the student leaders you know. You decide who should be invited and show up. Well, of course, we had standing room only, which is what you wanted.
Free pizza, sure.
Yeah, pizza. Yeah, right. And so at the end of the day, we talked about what this could do, and they decided to get petitions, and they came to the board asking for it, and we were able to, with that, build it, and it's still a great asset at the university.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you're a big fan of the university and its athletics program as well, the Student Recreation Center, the sport teams, the Rockets. In fact, the basketball facility is named for your family, specifically your older brother, John. How did that come about? Savage Arena.
Well, when Jim McComas was the president of the university, and he said, when John got sick, he said clearly that John had helped him more than anybody else. And John had been off the board, I believe, when McComas came on the board. I'm not sure of that. John was chairman of the board and very involved in the university, but I think he'd been off by then. But he had been very close to Dr. McComas. And McComas said, your brother has helped more than anybody since I've been president, has helped me as president. And I'd like to do something special for him. And Jim McComas was the one who promoted that. And obviously the Board of Trustees agreed with it. And it's a great honor to John and to Kate and their family. It's not named after the Savage family. It's named after John Savage for what he did and what Kate did helping him.
Mm-hmm. Bob, I want to talk a little bit more about your involvement with the University of Toledo, and that certainly includes the College of Business. You were instrumental in helping to get a College of Business building constructed. How did that come about?
Well, Dan Johnson, Dr. Dan Johnson, was the president of the University of Toledo. I happened to be on the search committee that talked him into being our president. He was an outstanding president. They had not had a capital drive in a while. They were in the process of putting that together. When this internal staff that had been working on that for many months had it together, Dan decided he would invite 4 couples besides he and his wife to listen to them, and it was a late afternoon 4:30, 5 o'clock type gathering, and it was very interesting. I'd never been invited to anything like that, but when they got done, they did not have anything in it for the College of Business except some academic chairs and things which are very difficult to get the business community excited about unless that's their particular love. And Dick Anderson was sitting next to me, and when they got done, I said, Dick, I think it's time to build a new building. The building we got, the Stranahans put together, is a great building, but it is now aged some. It does not have the technology in it our students should be learning. And I think Dan ought to consider that as opposed to some of the things that are on that list that we just heard. Why don't you go get him, because there were very few people in this room at the time. I said, why don't you go talk to him, and I'll get a glass of wine. Dick doesn't drink wine, and I'll meet you in the corner. And so I got my glass of wine, and I took one for Dan, and we started talking to him in the corner, and I said, Dan, I just have one problem. I said, the easiest thing to raise money for would be a absolutely state-of-the-art, high-tech building to be next to Stranahan Hall. And the business community always invest in things they like. It's very difficult, from my view, to get big checks from attorneys and doctors, but it's not from the business people if you have an idea. And I think Dick and I could do a pretty decent job of getting some excitement if we could come up with something that really would change the education level for the College of Business undergrad students. And that's really, Dan came back about 3 weeks later with his list, and it had the business building right at the top. And Jim Huffman and Jim Murray and John Such, along with Dick Anderson and myself. We were an informal committee that put that together. I think the committee, Paul Orman was on the committee. I think it only met twice, and we rounded up the money that it took to be the part other than the state money, which were quite a few $1 million, and therefore, we had the ability to put it together. My company obviously was very helpful in that, as were Sue and I. So,
what year was that the building came along?
I have to back up a little bit. It probably has been up. It's been open now probably 6 years or 7 years.
Now,
at the most, I suppose.
Part of all that, I know you were interested in seeing a professional sales major created at the university. There was none. Why was that important to you?
Well, I think it's interesting. One of the problems is if you happen to be pretty academic, you probably don't have a great regard for people in the sales business. That's just reality. It kind of runs counter to your education. But the reality is, all sales is the ability to tell the story for your company. And every company needs that. If they don't have that, nothing happens. Mm-hmm. And there's an old line that nothing ever happens till the sale's made in business, and that's the truth. And it seemed to me that as a university that is good but not prominent, like some big business schools, that what you want to do is be innovative and come up with things that business needs that somebody else isn't offering. And many PhDs would feel sales would not be worthy, in fairness, of an academic approach. And we're talking about a true professional sales major. At the time of the accredited colleges of business in America, there were none. It took about 5 years to get the faculty educated to the fact that this was a great idea for the university. And when it did pass and became part of the program, we were the second accredited college of business in the country. Today, there are many, many of them. They have national contests. Our group still does extremely well in those competitions. And there were 300 people taking sales courses this past year, and I believe they have about 75 majors. Every one of them gets more than one job offer. And the average starting pay, and I just heard this in the last couple of days, was $55,000, which is an incredible starting pay.
I'd be happy with that today.
Yeah, amen, amen. But I do take great pride in the fact that the endurance of chipping away at picking up support for it took a long time.
It's certainly a two-way street, because I know the University of Toledo is very grateful for all your contributions over the years. In fact, chose you as the commencement speaker back in 2005. Am I right about that? That had to be quite an honor for you.
Yes, it certainly was. It was a lot of fun, and it was in John F. Savage Hall, which certainly made it even more fun to speak in my brother's the hall at the university. And my brother gave no money for that. The university, when he got sick, decided, and the president of the university told me at the time that it was Dr. Jim McComas, that John had done more for him than anybody since he had moved to Toledo, and he wanted to do something to recognize his longtime commitment to the university, and that's why they did it. But it was fun, and
Do you remember your message, basically, in a nutshell?
Yes, that life can be exciting if you work at making it exciting to the graduates. And I just spoke to the graduates, told a lot of stories about the grocery store, people in that audience, and it was a full house at Savage Hall. Relate to those kind of stories. You know, when a first-generation person to go to college graduates, the aunts show up, the grandparents, the uncles. I mean, it's a festive occasion, and it should be. And we aimed our talk at letting them know how valuable their experience will be as they look back on it, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, Bob, a little plug here for my former employer. The Toledo Blade ran a cover story in its Sunday magazine back in 1987, which featured you and your brother John and your employees on the cover. Really wonderful profile of your business. That had to be very gratifying for them to get recognition as well.
Yeah, well, it wasn't only gratifying, Tom, but it was surprising. We knew that they were working on a business story, had no idea, just assumed it would be a 2-column story probably on the business section. But the Wednesday or Thursday before Sunday, they ran a little ad for the Blade in the Blade featuring the cover of the Sunday supplement, and we were shocked. And it certainly was a huge boost to our business, because it made people recognize how big we had become quickly, and it was a fun picture with my brother and myself and many of our associates standing behind us, supporting us.
I know that you and Sue also are big supporters of the place where we sit today, the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. In fact, Sue is still on the board, is she not?
She is.
And a great contributor to that cause as well.
She loves being on the library board, and she works at it a great deal.
Mm-hmm. Now, we haven't talked about, several years ago, you have a second residence. You bought a family farm in Michigan, about 45 minutes away from Toledo. Must be a great place to take your family. It's sort of a retreat to mingle with the kids, educate them in many of the same ways your father did you.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about the family farm?
Sure. We decided once we had some discretionary money that we would buy a place in the middle of nowhere, and we were hunting for water. And I thought we could grow trees and probably have the trees pay for the expenses and all that. I would flunk that test if you analyze what's happened. But we bought 80 acres, 45 minutes away in Michigan. And it was really a desolate kind of area. It did have a river coming through it, the Tiffin River, which they call Bean Creek.
A river runs through it.
The river runs through it, right? Yeah, it's a current. And I grew up when my dad could talk to me every day because we worked in the grocery store. And so the farm was our attempt to recreate our ability to talk to our kids. And our kind of business doesn't lend itself to having young people hanging around the office. And so my wife and I settled we would find a vacant piece of land, and we would treat it as really a destination point, that we wouldn't have a TV and we wouldn't have phones. Now today, that's tough to relate to because everybody has their phone in their pocket. But in those days, that wasn't the case. And we found a great piece of property that was really in very bad shape from a farming standpoint, which made it perfect for us, 45 minutes from our house up outside of Morenci, Michigan. And it's 80 acres, and the farmers didn't want it because it didn't produce the degree of corn per acre and those kind of things. It was an old gravel pit that had been abandoned. We brought in a crane and connected some of the gravel pits and made a couple acre pond. And then we built a house, and we built a house with stone in the fireplace that came from the gravel pits. Found somebody who could crack it, which was a formidable task. And we can burn almost 5-foot logs in the fireplace, and it's our respite. We go up there, there's never a TV to watch. The kids had to talk to us whether they wanted to or not. And so it was fun to find ways of trying to get inside their heads as they grew up. And it's still today my favorite place on earth to walk and just be with nature and the deer and the wild. And the kids and I actually planted 30,000 trees, which we were hoping to sell.
30,000?
30,000. We had a machine, a dentist by the name of Dr. Harvey Boehner owned the machine. I borrowed it, and it was like a pizza knife. It would cut, and you had a little seed in it, and you'd pull it with the tractor, and you just put the seedlings down in it. And we thought we would plant Christmas trees. I forgot to sell them, so now we have 60-foot trees that the deer hide in, and it's kind of but it's my favorite place to be.
Why no TV at the farm?
Well, once again, in the grocery store, my dad touched us because he was there all the time. And Sue and I decided that the kids knew how to watch television. We didn't have to teach that. And maybe we should have a quiet spot where eventually they talk to you whether they want to or not. And that was the design of the farm from the get-go, and it's never changed. Now, we have brought up on some key games. I borrowed the TV from our education center at Savage & Associates. I haven't done that in the last 15 years, I don't think. But it is meant to come up and actually interact and communicate. And it is a great place to do that because it's obviously very quiet. And you can't see the house from any road, even in the dead of winter, because it's in a rolling.
Did you have to build the house? Or was
Yes, we did. And it took us 3 years, just short of 3 years. We did a lot of the coolie work ourselves. It's a phenomenal. It has it only has 2 bedrooms in it, but then it has a bunkhouse. It has 12 bunks behind the fireplace on the second level. And I got the idea really at the library. I went down and I was looking through old cowboy books, and I found this bunkhouse, and I said, this is what we're going to build. So another good use of the library.
Absolutely. You mentioned your brother Jim briefly.
Yes.
Can you talk about your other siblings, not just John, but Jim and your sisters? How many still live, and where are they?
Yes, I'd be glad to do that, Tom. My oldest sister is Marie Witherell, and then we have Frances Jean Summers and Elizabeth Campbell, and my sister Nancy Coyle and Margaret, and Ellen Doris Wall. Ellen and Margaret are both deceased. Marie is in her 91st year out at Kingston, and my 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Frances, are in Virginia. They live in retirement centers. They're both fine shape, not perfect shape, but for their ages, they're in their upper 80s, are in good shape in very nice places. I visited them. I always visit them at least 3 times a year. When I'm in Washington, I'll slide down and see them. They're about an hour and 20 minutes apart. And Brother Jim is out at Foundation Park here in town and has Alzheimer's, and it was diagnosed from the beginning as a alcohol caused dementia. And unfortunately is not very communicative these days. I saw him 2 days ago. I still stop and visit him, but he really is sliding.
Well, that's too bad. I remember Jim well and fondly.
Yeah, he's a great guy. My sister Nancy, by the way, was at our house 2 nights ago. She lives in Indiana, and she and I are the 2 more mobile ones in the family. But everybody takes great pride in the way Dad raised us and the values we have, and everybody is a contributor.
Bob, it's impossible to look at the Savage family's impact on Toledo and not think of the Kennedys. Both large Catholic families with a strong father figure and a strong sense of service to others. Do you find that comparison flattering?
Oh, well, first of all,
Or valid?
No, it wouldn't be valid. It's a natural maybe thing because of some of the commonalities. Remember, Joe Kennedy had enormous amounts of money, and that really my father never had any to speak of. So, but I think our value system is clear right across the family, and I think that was instilled by my dad. I'm sure it was instilled by my mom too when she was living. I just never witnessed that because I never knew her. But I take great pride in being a Savage. I think the most people in the family do.
Who has inspired you the most over the years at the national level? Would it be JFK? Inspired you most as a young man, or who since?
Well, I think JFK did as a younger person. I mean, he was just an exciting guy, as Bobby was. I think FDR, I'm old enough, he died when I was in grade school, was a real hero of most people that grew up in industrial areas. Certainly Dwight Eisenhower was a phenomenal leader and came back from World War II and was the symbolism. But unfortunately, we're not having as many heroes as we used to. And I think all of us are really appalled by the way Washington does not work today. And unfortunately, it could really be the ruination of the country if we don't get that straightened out, because we certainly like to figure out how to stop progress as opposed to trying to unite thought.
You often talk about your empathy for all people, including those who don't necessarily have the resources, economic resources, to pursue the same education that you got. How do we get more bright people, young people, college educated?
Well, I do think, Tom, one of the sadnesses that I see in our system is the cost of higher education. I think when you read the statistics of people coming out of college with a $100,000 debt and they have a degree in education, you look at it, look at it as a financial planner, if you will, and say that won't work, or it won't work without an awful lot of sacrifice beyond what we should be asking. And I'm not saying I have the solution to it, but we have to figure out a way with technology to make higher education much cheaper and to get it to everybody. And I think that is what built America. I mean, the GI Bill was the most creative thought that Roosevelt and his group had in order to let people who had sacrificed at the beginning benefit from the riches of America. And when you put that together with the law that allowed them to get GI loans for houses that were, next to nothing in interest and all that, and that really gave the middle class and the lower class a chance to play the game. And unfortunately, we don't tend to have that today, and it could be our ruination that we don't.
As we sit here today in December of 2013. You will be turning 76
I will, yeah.
on Christmas Day. How active are you now in the day-to-day operations of Savage and Associates?
Well, I'm very involved in the day-to-day operations that have nothing to do with policy. They have allowed me to maintain the office that I had for the 28 years that I was the CEO, and I have a great relationship in the halls, but I don't try to set policy. I have not done that in a number of years. I only talk about policy with the people in charge of creating policy, and only when they bring it up. I'm the cheerleader. Because our management team, I think this is really interesting, and you look at other businesses. We have 7 people who are stockholders and own the company today. J.R. Tolan is our boss. Every one of the 7, and they must be, their ages must be, 40, maybe 38, 52 or something like that. But every one of them walked in those doors as a 21-year-old college graduate. So they've been there 20, 25 years. I know what they think. I've worked with them. They're really sharp, caring people. And we have one of the most, and I know a lot about our industry in the country because I've been very involved in the industry. I don't know anybody that has a better attitude going on in their shop of people that are sharp, caring people and relatively smart. And I think that's a fun place to be, and that's why I like going there. And a lot of my great friends are associated with Savage and Associates.
Well, speaking of smart young people, you raised 6 of them, and all of them are products of excellent schools and colleges and doing well, aren't they?
They are.
Can you talk about your children a little bit?
Oh, sure.
I won't ask you to show pictures.
No.
Maybe we can flash a few of them, but how are they doing? Where are they?
Well, Tom, I could talk to you for a long, long time. First of all, as I said earlier, the students, the student in them came out of Sue, not out of myself. And they went to great universities. They went to Boston College, William and Mary. 2 went to the Wharton School. One went on, one's Duke, went on, got a graduate degree from the Kennedy School at Harvard, and was named a fellow of Harvard, 1 and 2 in the class. The oldest son is here in town, young Bob. He's probably the most knowledgeable person in this end of the state at how you fund new high-tech businesses. That's his business. None of the children have ever worked one day at Savage and Associates by design. I wanted to be their father, not their boss. And I see that in lots of clients, and I don't see it work real well. So John and I made that decision early, and I never brought John's kids in until John was sick, and today Kelly is with us, and Sean, both phenomenal assets to the organization. But that's what young Bob does. The 2 daughters live in Toledo, Lisa and Michelle. They're both stay-at-home moms. One was an Ernst & Young CPA, and the other one was a computer science major at William and Mary. Both very bright, but they've been blessed. Their husbands let them stay home and raise the children. That's a blessing. And they make sacrifices when they do that, but the sacrifices are just not having money, and nothing else is sacrificed. And when you see the kids they turn out, I personally think that's, if you can put it together, is a wonderful thing. And then we have one son that just moved a week ago, 3 weeks ago, from London. He'd been in London 9 years, moved to Boston. He joined another son who lives in Boston, and they are planning this next week to live like a 6-minute walk from each other down in Charlestown in the center part of Boston. And that makes it certainly much more convenient.
Sure.
We have our son Eric, who's the one who he really economically did unbelievably well. He was an investment banker with Salomon Brothers out of New York, went to Hong Kong as only an arrogant Wall Street firm could. They sent 14 people to Hong Kong to conquer China, and Eric was in that group. Well, they forgot to do that part of it, but they certainly did well. And Eric ended up running all the utilities in Asia for Salomon, did very well, and at 36 was set for the rest of his life economically, and went to Harvard, majored in microfinance, which is helping the poor people. And he's got funded, a professor that was a Brit at Harvard, took a liking to him and told him at the end of the first semester there'd be an advanced class. The next semester he'd be the only student and he was going to teach him everything he knew, and he did. And they met 3 times a week and just talked about those kind of things. And he hooked him up on the 4th or 5th session they had with 2 of Bill Gates's guys who actually work on the same floor as Gates at their company. And they funded him, and he's now in India, has 20 people or more working for him, well-educated Indians helping the poor. So,
Is that 6?
I think it is. Yes, I believe that's.
Okay.
That's
How many grandchildren?
We have 12.
12 now.
12.
Are you and Sue ever able to get all 6 of your children, all 6 spouses, and all 12 grandchildren together at one time?
We do it all the time, actually.
How do you make that work?
Well, you would think that you couldn't do that, but we go to Pawleys Island, South Carolina, every summer, and almost every year everybody shows up. We go for 1 week, and we rent 2 houses now. Used to rent 1, and we've done this. This is our 37th year or something. We're great in traditions. What we do repeatedly. Everybody tends to come home for Christmas. It's my birthday, as you indicated earlier, so they all show up, and they will all be here this Christmas.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And even in between, the one that lived in London, we would see him 4 or 5 times a year because he has worked for Root Learning. He's one of the Wharton graduates, and he works at Root Learning, which is stationed here. And so he would be coming in and out of town from Europe on business. And Eric, who is in India, we see at least 4 times a year. He's a big Duke guy, and he comes in and goes to Coach K's fantasy basketball camp every year, which is a big fundraiser. And you have to be an alumnus, I think, of Duke to do that. And Eric always goes to that. His wife made the mistake of giving him that as a present. It's a pretty expensive present. But since then, he's returned to all 10 years.
Now your family is indeed about tradition. And one of those traditions is that giant, is it a spruce tree out front? Mm. How tall is that thing?
Well, we live on Kenwood. We've lived there 44 years. Right. When we bought the house, it was as tall as the house. And today, I really don't know, Tom, but if I were to guess, it's 65, 70 feet high.
And every Christmas season, you would send your kids up that tree to hang lights.
And it happened actually about 8 days ago, and Michelle Bissell, our younger daughter, got stuck doing more of the work because some of the grandkids who are old enough to do it were busy at practice and things. And Martin Ollinger, Lisa's husband, was very involved in that. But it's about a 40 or 50 hour work project.
Certainly anybody who drives through that part of Toledo, Westgate area, and down Kenwood Boulevard knows the Savage Tree.
Yes, they don't know whose it is, but they certainly, all kinds of people stop and thank us. But it's a great family tradition, and I'm sure because my birthday's on Christmas, that's part of why we do more maybe at Christmas. But yeah, it's a fun thing. It's a great tree.
Another great family tradition is travel. You and Sue, I know, like to travel. You're gone a good deal of the time, and often to exotic, out-of-the-way places, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you've seen a good part of the world.
We saw Antarctica this year. We were on a boat for 18 or 19 days, a small boat, 120 people or something like that, and went to everything down there you wanted to see.
Everything's white?
Well, it's not. A lot of animal life. You go down in the summer, their summer, and phenomenal to see. Just on 3 different occasions, we were on beaches that had more than 100,000 penguins on them, and the one had 250,000. About the 3rd time you're walking up and down with them, Tom, they kind of look like humans after a while. I mean, it's kind of interesting, because they just, kind of, and they get in fights. We saw 3 people, 2 picking on one, and they finally knocked the guy down, and it was a riot.
Even penguins have bullies, huh?
Yeah, right, they do.
I know an outgrowth of that, your fondness for travel is your affection for photography. Both you and Sue are very accomplished photographers. And I have seen some of the artwork that grace your walls of your office, and of course on the walls at your home. That's an important way to keep those memories alive, isn't it? And it means a lot to you.
It does. As you know, my office, no one would ever accuse me of knowing an interior decorator. It's just all pictures on all the walls, a few trophies we've been fortunate enough to get, but 90% pictures, and they're all of animals from around the world. And I haven't golfed since we had our second child. And my wife, she said, make a list of everything you like to do. So I always work the yellow pads, and so I had 3 pages of things I like to do. And she said, well, you're the one who wants a big family. And she said, I do too, but if you want a big family, you better cut that down to 4 or 5 things rather than 3 or 4 pages. And golf was easy to get rid of. I wasn't very good at it anyway. But my hobby has been raising the family, and photography fits into that.
Yeah. Your other passions, good food, good wine. You made reference to wine earlier. I read somewhere that life is too short for cheap wine. Would you agree?
Yes, I would, actually. You can have inexpensive wine that's very good. I'm a pretty prudent, we don't drink expensive wine. I'm not saying we don't periodically, but we really drink moderate priced wine most of the time. I think I do know how to select it, and I enjoy it. But you know, you asked about the travel. The one thing we did, Tom, that most people will think nobody would do, nobody with a high IQ would do anyway. We drove to Alaska with 6 kids in a van. It was our new van from Toledo to Alaska and back.
Sounds like something out of a Chevy Chase movie.
Yeah, right. And I can tell you, we're not campers, but we camped all the way, with a couple of nights exceptions at the most, and had the time of our life. But we always took time during the year, during the summer, to go for 3 or 4 weeks with the kids somewhere to see a national park or something. And you know, I tell the people at Savage and Associates, if you work at a place that allows you to control your own time and you still take 2 weeks off, shame on you, because nobody really wants on their deathbed to wish they had cleaned their desk. I mean, at the end of the day, your family is what you should take care of, and we set the example by doing that. And we were actually gone for 4 weeks and 3 days when we drove to Alaska.
Amazing.
And you came back and the place was still running. So.
Well, as we mentioned, you're going to turn 76 in a few weeks from now. As you look back on a life well lived, but very much a life still in progress, any regrets, Bob?
No, actually, I don't. I mean, I don't have any big wish list either. I have absolutely had as good a life as anybody could ever have, especially coming up with meager means. And I think the pride of having been involved in all these things and have been a player and have enjoyed it, and I enjoy everything. I mean, that's just my demeanor.
Well, Bob, continued good health and success to you and obviously to Sue and your family, wonderful family. And I thank you for the gift of your time today. We much appreciate this opportunity. And we thank you as well for your interest in the Sight and Sound Video History Series here at the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. Remember, keep reading and keep learning.